You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Breaking news.
I don't want to alarm you, my friends, but I was saying on Friday how Brent, my partner, was cooking scones to put in the local rural show near us.
Because he thought the matriarchy had it for too long.
Because he thought that the traditional bakers
Very brave
have
taking on the Country Women's Association.
Exactly, and all the associated women's. He won. He baked his
Sorry,
scones.
what?
Holly, you played him down. You were like, oh, he doesn't even have a real recipe.
Did he cheat?
He's just putting it in.
I feel like he cheated.
Holly, what?
I'm going to bring some in because I couldn't today because I was on the
please.
train. I'm going to bring some in
Selfish.
and we will share the recipe. Scongate. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Monday, the 5th of February. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
I'm Jessie Stevens.
And on the show today, the Prime Minister is a liar. Everybody says so. So is that a bad thing? What or who is Ballerina Farm? And are her 13 million mostly female followers being entertained or radicalised? And gratitude is good for you, but what about when it's just toxic? But first,
In case you missed it, we lost an extraordinary woman over the weekend, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners are advised that this segment does contain the names of people who have died. The woman we lost was Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue, and she was a Yankunytjatjara leader and Indigenous rights activist. She was 91, and on the sad news of her passing, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese described her as one of the most remarkable leaders this country has ever known. Dr. O'Donoghue was too back in 1934 when she was forcibly taken from her family as part of the stolen generation. She was delivered to the missionaries with two of her sisters, and their two older siblings, a boy and a girl, were already there. It would be 33 years before she was reunited with her mother. And from that most traumatic start in life, what she went on to achieve by any means was truly remarkable. She became the first Aboriginal nurse trained at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, then a charge sister, and ultimately an icon of the Indigenous rights movement. Dr. O'Donoghue's leadership, tenacity and integrity were her strengths during decades of significant change in Indigenous affairs. She articulated the yes case for the 1967 referendum, where Indigenous people were recognised for the first time and given the vote.
It made me sad when I saw this news for lots of reasons, but I thought, I hate that she saw the referendum last year. Like, I hate that was something that
At the
after
end
a
of her
lifetime of advocacy that Australia voted no, and then because of world events and because of a lot of, reasons, we never really prosecuted it properly. And then I saw this and I went, our conversation hasn't evolved since that moment.
she was the first Aboriginal person to address the United Nations General Assembly. And this is all the way back in 1992. And one of the things she was saying, because she was speaking because it was the International Year of Indigenous People. And one of the things she spoke about then was recognising Indigenous Australians in Australia's constitution. A lot of the stories I've been reading today was saying that in her last few years, a lot of very important Indigenous leaders were going to sit with her. And there was just a heaviness around this whole issue. But what an amazing human. What an amazing woman to overcome what she overcame. Like, unbelievable.
She died peacefully on Kaurna country on Sunday in Adelaide, and her family said in a statement they were all by her side. Auntie Lowitja dedicated her entire lifetime of work to the rights, health and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We thank and honour her for all that she has done, for all the pathways she has created, for all the doors she opened, for all the issues she tackled head on, for all the tables she sat at, and for all the arguments she fought and won.
Do you accept that this was a lie?
Why didn't you level with voters at the election?
Can you name any of your election promises you are not now prepared to break?
You might have seen in the headlines the phrases stage 3 tax cuts, liar and broken election promise. And before I break down what's been happening, this is a story about much more than a single policy. It's about what we want from our Prime Minister. It's about what we mean by truth and promises and how spin can totally eclipse the actual details. Here's what happened. Before May 2022, when Anthony Albanese was elected, he promised not to touch stage 3 tax cuts, which was a coalition policy. What does that mean? It basically meant that people on larger salaries would pay less tax. And this was something that the Labor government campaigned on. They would not touch stage 3 tax cuts. And then they did. Over the last few weeks, the story has been everywhere. Albanese spoke at the National Press Club a couple of weeks ago about how policy can change in the face of new challenges. Some of the commentary around this policy change includes people saying, I've never seen a broken promise like this one. This will haunt Labor until the next election. And opposition leader Peter Dutton has called Albanese a liar.
I think he should call an election and put the change position to the Australian people and let them be a judge of his character.
What you might notice is missing from Dutton's criticism there is any analysis or even comment on the actual policy. And that's because while some are calling this the greatest broken promise of a decade, the changes benefit most Australians. So, does it matter when a broken promise actually benefits you? Almost 9 in 10 Australians are getting a tax cut greater than they would have otherwise. If you earn less than $150,000 a year, which most Australians do, this is broadly fabulous news. Some have predicted that this will backfire spectacularly. Albanese will be cast as untrustworthy, and how can we believe anything he says, and does he just break all his promises? Others say our PM is agile, he's rolling out a very popular policy, and the opposition has not yet said what they think of the tax cuts and whether they will block them. Because if they come out and say, we hate these tax cuts, we'll block them, very unpopular.
What had he promised to do that he didn't do?
He promised that he would not change the existing policy and that the tax cut, so basically if you earned more than $150,000 a year, things were going to look really good for your tax.
You were going to get a bigger tax cut. And what he's done is he's redistributed the tax cuts. So the people at the top end of the income ladder, they're still getting a tax cut, but they're getting less of one. Mm-hmm. And the people in the middle are getting a bit of the rich people's tax cut.
And that's different to what the previous policy of the Liberal government
Scott Morrison's
was.
policy.
And in the election, he said, I promise not to change what's
not to touch it. Now, Albanese has said, I'll tell you what integrity is. Not looking at lower and middle income earners and saying, sorry, I'm just Prime Minister, I am not in a position to help you. When I know I am in a position to help you, and this is what this plan does. Holly, do we just want a leader who tells us the truth, or is this a sign that the grown-ups are in charge and they pivot when they need to?
I think the latter, because I think that you've got to have respect for the electorate, right? And the electorate aren't stupid. We don't like broken promises. We don't like being lied to. We don't like being told when I get in, X, Y, Z is going to happen. And then when they get in, that definitely doesn't happen. But on the other hand, we're not idiots. And we can see that the economy is changing and shifting. And we can see that the circumstances we're all living in now are not the same as the circumstances in which this tax policy was designed. And obviously there are people who never liked it in the first place and that's irrelevant. But right now, I think there's a very good argument, and the polls are showing that Albanese and his government made the right call. The thing is the machinations behind that decision would have been significant. They would have known this is giving an easy free kick to our opposition to say we can't be trusted. And we know that the electorate already has a really low opinion of how trustworthy politicians are.
Yeah.
And so the people behind the scenes, the people in the grey suits or whatever we call them, are weighing up what's got more benefit for us. I mean, obviously, hopefully they're thinking what's got more benefit for the Australian people, but also in terms of how much skin they're going to lose. Is it worth a few headlines calling us liars if everybody likes it? Because if everybody likes it, those headlines are going to disappear quite quickly. And it feels like that's what's happening.
But Mia, how can Australians, if promises mean nothing, and this is, I remember Julia Gillard said absolutely no carbon tax. She put in a carbon tax. They called her Julia.
Why did you lie to us?
Right, well, I can talk to you about.
And why are you continuing to lie and say, well, I didn't really mean to lie?
That's stark. Like when someone, looks you in the eye and makes you a promise and then breaks it, even if it's for the greater good or whatever, does it leave him looking very untrustworthy?
You're right, Holly, about on both sides, there are a lot of calculations being done on what's the best way to land a message that's most advantageous to our side of politics. And for Dutton and the Liberal Party, I would say they're relying on the fact that many people will just see tax cuts and liar and assume that they're worse off, no matter what their income is. And in actual fact, I think it's 10% of Australians who are getting less tax cuts than they thought. But the rest of Australians, as you said, will be benefiting. What's also interesting to note is the language around this, because it used to be called backflips. People used to say this politician did a backflip, which is quite a good description. I blanch at the term liar because a liar suggests intent. When you lie, when you change your mind because of more information that's come to hand or because of changed economic conditions or changed social conditions, whatever it is, or because you know more than you used to me, I guess you could call that a backflip, but I think you could also call it changing your mind. Now, that's not nearly as inflammatory or accusatory as calling someone a liar, which suggests that they were always going to do this and they deliberately misled people to get elected. And that speaks to character, not performance.
And that's a
I think they're the
possibility.
calculation.
That might well have happened.
Oh, yeah, who knows?
It might have happened that, people have been pushing for tax reform.
But language is important.
Yes, and didn't like the model of tax reform that the Liberals had designed, may well have been saying, we'll get elected and then we'll deal with it.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough. But I agree with you, Mia. I think because we've got such little trust in politicians at the moment, we do frame changing your mind as a weakness. Like that any kind of reconsideration of anything or changing a position on anything is a weakness. And that goes across politics, the kind of digging around to see something you once said back in the old days. And
it's not just
do
politics.
You still believe that?
You see a lot of cancellation driven by that, by looking back for evidence and then calling someone a hypocrite because 10 years ago they said this or they tweeted that or 20 years ago they did this and now they're saying something completely different. It's like, well, if I was wearing the same things or thinking the same things or behaving in the same way as I did 10 or 20 years ago, I think that would be sad. Or would that be consistent?
I wonder too if it's a result of us merging to a more American system where character and the individual and the cult of personality around someone matters more than the party. Because we've talked about this before. We vote in a party, we don't vote in a person. Whereas in the US, it's very person, individual driven. The comparisons to the US as well, I was thinking about Trump.
I think that's interesting. I think sometimes in Australia we very much vote out a person and vote in a person. So I think Kevin 07, he was very much the driver of that. Scott Morrison and Paul Keating back in the day were very much personally voted out.
Yeah, right.
To the point where, I've heard it said that Paul Keating often doesn't turn up to these big, if there's a big campaign launch or something and you've got all the icons of the ALP and he doesn't come because the feeling, and I think this could be said about Scott Morrison as well, the feeling is that when people are reminded of them, they'll try to vote them out again. Wow. Even though they've gone, and it will then be bad for the incumbents.
At the rhetoric around this, though, I wondered if it was the gap that Trump is filling because there's a plain speakingness to Trump that obviously appeals to a lot of people. And they go, well, politicians are liars and they don't tell us the truth anyway and blah, blah, blah.
The irony, of course, being that he's the biggest liar of all of them.
Exactly. But you look at this and you go, the closer you look at this, the simpler it is. But you would look at headlines and you just go, I have no idea what's going on. They all contradict each other. And come election time, I guarantee that all we will see is the coalition going, Labor lied to you. And I won't even remember what about.
I don't know if that's true. I think that if this policy proves to be as popular as it is, the coalition will move on very quickly and start blaming them about something else because they won't want people to remember that the reason they've got more money in their pocket today is because of something that Labor did. So I think that all depends on the spin that follows it. Because another chaos theory here is that, how we've talked before about how there's this chaotic kind of PR disruption going on. It used to be that everything's got to be positive and everything. So the Trump example shows us that really a lot of noise is a good thing in a way. And I wonder if there's almost a chaos theory, which is no one expects politicians to tell the truth now anyway. Our expectations of them are so low that you kind of go, well, if you're going to be a liar, at least be a liar who benefits me. That's certainly a sort of Trumpian model, which I don't for 1 minute think that Albo is a Trumpian model. I think that he actually tries quite hard to be the opposite of a personality politician. He just wants to be quite a quiet, non-controversial person and bank on maybe people want that at the moment. But I think that people will forgive the broken promise, in inverted commas, if it ends up being good for them.
I know that Mamamia out loud do an extraordinary job, and right around the country that is the case.
I can't look away from Ballerina Farm. Now, do either of you two know what I'm talking about?
I do, sad to say.
I didn't until this morning, and I am now obsessed.
Yeah. Quick cheat sheet for those of you with better things to do with your time. Ballerina Farm is an Instagram account, a TikTok account, and an actual place. But when we talk about it in this context, we're really talking about a woman. And she's called Hannah Neeleman. And she lives on Ballerina Farm. And she used to be a ballerina. So that explains that for you. Right now, she is a young mom. She has 13 million followers across those social media platforms. And she also has 8 children.
Obsessed.
I know, right? She lives on Ballerina Farm, which is in Utah. There's a hint there because Utah is a place where lots of Mormons live. In a cold and windswept but dramatically beautiful valley where she and her 8 children and her rugged husband do things like churn her own butter and bake their own bread.
Making our annual dinner and a pumpkin. I've got the filling going.
And she's got this iconic olive green Argus stove, and she wears these kind of coarse, shapeless, but somehow aspirational linen aprons. And then at the same time, she looks kind of like a teenager who ice plunges into the stream on her farm in her activewear.
She embodies the Tradwife movement, the traditional wife
Very
movement
much.
That's big on social media.
She also enters beauty pageants. The reason that she's all over everywhere right now is she's just entered a pageant called Mrs. American, which is different from Mrs. America and different from Miss America, but let's just go with it.
Yep.
Mrs. American is a beauty pageant for married women, and she just competed after just having a baby.
2 weeks
Two
after.
weeks after having her 8th baby in her 8th home birth, she went and competed in this beauty pageant. And that entailed all the things you imagine. So swimsuit round.
I liked the detail in the New York Times that she is still bleeding because that baby is only 2 weeks old. So the postpartum bleeding is continuing, but she's not wearing nappies anymore, which is good for the pageant.
And I'm fascinated by this incredibly conflicting vision of womanhood that Hannah represents and that people are obviously obsessed with. Where 1 minute she looks like a Fox News anchor on a red carpet, you know, in these like skin-tight gowns with the cleavage and all the things. And then the next she looks like a little farm mouse with like flour on her nose and a baby on her boob. And she kind of looks like Trump's America. But then again, I think the appeal of her is bigger than that because I think there are a lot of women who are going, oh, her life looks kind of simple. Not that it would be simple with 8 kids on a farm in Utah, but her life looks kind of simple and somehow I wish I was just making bread and more. What is going on?
Well, a couple of pertinent details to know is that her rugged husband is the son of the owner of the JetBlue airline and a couple of other airlines. And Ballerina Farm in itself is a business because they sell meat and you can buy Ballerina Farm meat and it's shipped
And you
all
can
over the
also
world.
buy everything that's
Merch.
in her videos. You can buy
Yeah.
the aprons, you can buy the bowls, you can buy the, yeah.
Can I ask, do you think that she should have been forthcoming about the money? Because she's kind of not sold, but she's had people follow her and, oh, we're going to try this farm thing and I've got 8 kids and everyone's going, how do you do that with childcare? Should she have been forthcoming with the fact that money wasn't an issue for her?
That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about that. The whole thing feels sinister to me and I can't work out why. It feels very Handmaid's Tale meets Stepford Wives, meets
I totally disagree.
Trump's America.
Why? And why do you keep saying Trump's America? Because
I'll tell you exactly why I keep saying Trump's America, because I don't know
How
enough
she votes.
about Hannah's
She's
personal
not,
life.
they're not very political, but they are very religious.
Yes, they're Mormons, right? So she's got 8 children, her sister's got 10. They are religiously conservative.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you were thin slicing, you would draw some lines there about how she votes and how she presents. This isn't necessarily about Hannah herself, but think about the women that Trump surrounds himself with and also who are representing, in a way, that side of politics on Fox News. They all look like Hannah Neeleman. They are white, they are blonde, they are thin, they are pretty, and they are a kind of non-threatening successful. So obviously, if you're a news anchor on Fox News or you're a beauty pageant winner and a businesswoman on Ballerina Farm, you're probably a pretty ambitious, hardworking human being. But it's important that you're always, my family is my life, my husband is the head of the house, my greatest joys. And
I don't work. That's the irony, that the whole ethos of a tradwife is that they're traditional, so they don't work. The husband is the breadwinner. He is the head of the family. And yet all of these women who have these enormous followings and monetize them, they have every right to, that is work. And as you say, Jessie, it's easier to not work if money is not a problem. So either you're earning it through your work that no one can see, or you have family money, or your husband is very, very wealthy.
I'm going to defend this ballerina that I met an hour ago.
Go ballerina. I don't have beef with her.
No, not
yes,
with
you're
her.
looking at culturally why she's interesting.
I have beef with what she's selling us.
Okay.
And I don't mean the pots and pans.
You used the word propaganda in the meeting hall, and I said, I feel like it's sinister and I don't know why. And you said, because it's propaganda. What is it propaganda for?
For me, because we know that in America there is an enormous right-wing Christian push. We know it is having effect on everyday lives of Americans all over the country in terms of their reproductive rights, in terms of what books they're allowed to have in their library, in terms of the healthcare their kids can get, all that stuff. This feels like a conservative propaganda machine, but maybe I'm deeply overthinking it. And it's just that women and men, I guess, but women want to look at a woman doing wholesome female things.
We project.
Female
we project,
things in
and
inverted
then we
commas.
have all our infighting, and poor Hannah just wants to make her butter and have 8 children. And the reason why we're watching Hannah the ballerina, I can't stop watching her because she's a perfect story, because her life begs so many questions.
Yes.
The kids learn at home. So there's some kind of homeschooling thing going on.
So she says, because there's a lot of behind the scenes chatter about she must
Nannies.
have an army of helpers.
Yeah.
She says, we sometimes get a babysitter for date night, and I have a teacher that comes in and schools 5 of the children in one room.
Yes. So she has these 8 children. I'm obsessed with people with lots of kids because I just love their lives and I like looking at them make lunch, right? I just think the maths is interesting.
We all love that.
The other part of her appeal is that 60 million Americans live on the land, right? Have rural lives. And they are incredibly unrepresented. When you look at the US, you look at New York and you look at LA. You look at cities. There's a lot of people
the coastal elites, I believe Trump would like you to call them.
And this is this middle America who are just living their lives. And look, she's an exception, obviously, and going and doing the beauty pageant thing 2 weeks after giving birth. Like,
most of middle America's lives do not look like that.
No.
The rural ones.
The fact that she's working with livestock and that she's making her own stuff and that basically like they live on the land and part of her job is farming is actually something that a lot of Americans do. So either you're interested because you go, oh, I can't do that and I never say that, or I don't do that and I am fascinated by it. And I think that we're making her a political figure that she's not, because we're calling her a tradwife. And even in the New York Times piece, they were like, criticism as a tradwife. And I thought, why is that a criticism? Like, if she's made that choice to have 8 kids and to, like, why
because
is that?
It feels like a dog whistle. I agree with you, Jessie, right, that there's nothing necessarily about Hannah. Women should live whatever life they want, right? And I think that there's something very seductive for most of us, particularly urban, frazzled, busy, rushing around trying to make ends meet all the time, trying to spend time with our children, can't quite work out how to do it. There's something very seductive about looking at this. Her physical beauty is not an accident, right? Like, we have similar kind of influences here who might be, I don't know, living in the hills behind Byron and floating around in their linen and making their own kombucha. Like, there's something very seductive and calming about that.
Yeah.
But there's a dog whistle here that I think, particularly in America, you probably can't ignore the political context, because it's also sort of saying, again, I don't want to project too much onto her, but it's this whole ideals of womanhood. I think we should have lots of different ideals of womanhood, that women can be whatever they want, and this is one of them, right? But it's like she bakes her own bread, she hollows out her own pumpkins, she milks her own cows, and she looks banging in a evening gown, and it's apparently effortless to have all these children, and she can bounce back. I don't just mean physically, I mean health-wise and work and all the things very quickly afterwards. And her marriage seems to be perfect. It's like, it's a lot of ideals that's being sold to us in a way that I feel, can it not be political?
I'm fighting my instincts to not project my own insecurities onto her. You're 100% right. In the same way that when there's a 55-year-old woman posing on a magazine cover in, nude. You're right. It's not the responsibility of every individual woman to make every other woman in the world feel good about their own choices. I totally get that. I guess my fear is what Holly says, and none of this is against Hannah personally. It's more, what does it mean culturally when she has 9 million followers? 13 million, probably 100 million by the end of this week. What does it mean when we are being fed that sort of content? And again, when I say propaganda, I don't mean like the Republican Party's behind it. I don't mean that. And she doesn't talk about politics, although, as I said, they do talk about religion a lot. Like when they were talking to the New York Times, who did a story on her entering this pageant, and she said, I didn't know if I was going to do it. My husband and I, we prayed on it. And my husband said, God, please give Hannah a sign about whether she should do this or not. And maybe her life is that good. Now, most people, the life that they put out on Instagram is not entirely reflective. But it feels like we've made so much progress by allowing women to pull back the curtain and go, it's hard. Looking after kids is I'm struggling, or I feel this way about my body, or after I've had a baby, I haven't bounced back. And it feels like this is a glorification of a whole lot of throwbacks to an embodiment of what it means to be a good woman and a perfect woman that we thought we'd left behind.
There is nothing really about her life that is relatable, and I think that's fine. But I think you could definitely argue that just as we have plenty of people on our social medias representing a kind of womanhood that's very kicking career goals, sex positive, whatever it might be, that it's also, of course, fair enough that there should be lots of influencers out there who are representing, I get my fulfillment through parenthood, I love being a wife. Like, that's fine. But you're watching a fantasy version of what it's like to live in the country with a large family. Like, I think that the average Australian or American who lives in the country with a large family, it doesn't look like that. And we are buying into the visuals very specifically. In the case of Ballerina Farm, literally, you can buy my apron, you can buy my bowl, you can buy my stove. There's a lot made about this amazing stove that she's got and all this stuff. I think it's a craving we have for a simpler time, inverted commas, as we say. And I think, as I say, that all versions of womanhood should be represented. But I also think there is something inherently political about, particularly in America, in pushing this version of womanhood. She is, to an average right-wing American dude, the perfect wife. She looks beautiful and hot in and out of clothes. She will serve you. She will look after your kids. She will teach them at home. She won't challenge your authority. She'll make you home-cooked meals. And that bit feels very regressive.
If you want to make Out Loud part of your routine 5 days a week, we release segments on Tuesdays and Thursdays just for Mamamia subscribers. To get full access, follow the link in the show notes, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers.
Actor America Ferrera was nominated for an Oscar a few weeks ago for her performance in Barbie. And you may remember the viral climax of that performance was the speech that she gave about what it means to be a woman on the subject of what it means to be a woman, like Ballerina Farm. Here's a reminder of what she said.
Always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget that the system is rigged, so find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard, it's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault.
Oh, there's one phrase that she keeps coming back to throughout that speech, which goes on for a few minutes, and it is always be grateful. You can hear that she's almost spitting it by the end. This was the jumping off point for a newsletter I read this week by the writer Annie Scott, who surfaced the idea that the emphasis we have on women having to be grateful has actually twisted into something bad. and she calls it toxic gratitude. And she writes, the idea that we should be grateful can stop us from fixing things, from complaining, from reaching for what we want. Sure, gratitude can lift us up, but it can also keep us small. Gratitude can keep us trapped. Gratitude can stop us from changing career. I should be grateful for my steady job. Leaving a bad relationship. I should be grateful to be loved. Or for pushing for more equality. I should be grateful to just be included. We must all acknowledge the good things in our life for our own sanity, but writing down that you're grateful for coffee every morning is not going to cure your depression. Such a great line. And she says how she did have depression and she tried writing down all the things she was grateful for every day. And she said it was just another thing to do before she crawled into the bed that she so desperately craved. And I related to that idea of gratitude feeling like it's another job, because I've tried that as well, focusing on what I'm grateful for rather than what's frustrating me. Jessie, do you keep a gratitude journal? I feel like if you ever would, it would be in January when you always go a bit woo-woo.
So I listen to all the self-improvement podcasts. I listen to Atomic Habits, the audiobook, because I just trying to improve my life for just January. But now we're into February. I wanted to hate this because I was like, no, Hugh Van Cuylenberg, all the people I believe they tell me the gratitude good make me happy.
I think there's some science as well.
There's some science.
Yeah.
And I was like, Mia, you cranky bitch.
There's a whole self-help movement that's based
about gratitude.
Yeah.
And then I read the article and I went, oh, she's right. I loved the term of weaponized gratitude. I think it can be weaponized against us. I've seen it recently in the context of my sister Claire, and, she'll be talking about this down the track, but had a rough birth, right? The amount of people that say a version of, Elisa, baby is healthy, you should be grateful that you got a healthy baby, blah, blah, blah. We do this to women all the time. We can't acknowledge both. And then what you do is you make the person feel incredibly guilty that they don't feel pure, unadulterated gratitude. And in that way, gratitude can be a little gaslighty. And I've seen this said about cognitive behavioral therapy, which I did for years, where you sit and a psychologist helps you try and challenge your thought patterns. And then you kind of go, that's not how I feel. If you're looking at your life and you're going, I'm not happy in my marriage, I'm not happy in my job, and I want to live in a different house, maybe that's telling you something. I don't know if any amount of sitting down, writing in a journal, going, no, I am grateful for those things is going to change that. Holly?
Yeah, you don't want your commitment to your gratitude practice to mean that you never do anything, that it stops you from doing anything. I don't know. I was thinking about this because I was reading that and it's a great column and she's right. She is absolutely right. It can be weaponized. But I also know that there's a lot of science about how the gratitude journaling and everything can change your brain, and I don't really understand that. And then the non-science side of me says, I know that bitter, complaining people are really annoying. Yeah. So I would always rather be around somebody who is looking at the fact that, well, at least
look on the bright side.
Yeah, I think that there is nothing wrong with that. And I think that when I feel myself slipping into a really negative place and I'm frazzled and overwhelmed and why don't I have this and why don't I have that and why isn't my life more like this, it is helpful for me to go, shut the fuck up. Look at all the things you do have. Look at all the things you get to do. Look at the stuff that lots of other people don't have. I do actually find it helpful. However, I could never have the discipline to do a gratitude journal. So I guess I agree with her premise in general that can be used as a way to keep you small, but I think there's nothing wrong with also acknowledging how good you have it a lot of the time.
Yeah, when you're someone who has it good as well. When I was listening to all my podcasts over January, and the people who talk about gratitude are really rich, really successful, just had this incredible best-selling book that they're trying to flog.
About gratitude.
Things are going really, really well for them. And there was an episode I listened to.
Is that a coincidence?
Well, that's what I was like, maybe it's easier to be grateful when things are going well. And I listened to the How to Fail model, which is great, but it was Oprah talking about failure, which is funny. And she failed, and I think it was Glennon Doyle kind of asking, how'd you come back from that? And she was like, I am Oprah Winfrey. Could I be any luckier? And I was like, I am not Oprah Winfrey. So how do those of us who are not Oprah Winfrey, you know what I mean?
But I think Oprah's gaslighting herself because, she's Oprah Winfrey. That is the baseline. She can't change that. She just is.
Yeah.
And by virtue
but she
of
created Oprah Winfrey.
That's what I mean. By virtue of all her hard work, she is Oprah Winfrey. Does that mean it still doesn't piss her off when she twists her ankle or when her internet isn't working or whatever? Like I feel like sometimes gratitude, which is firstly very passive, it's a very passive state. It's not an active state. So gratitude is about acceptance. It's the opposite of change. Like instead of wanting to change something, be grateful for what you already have. Be grateful for the status quo. You don't hear a lot of men being told to be gratitude.
I don't think
you also
that's true.
don't hear men being grateful.
It was a lot of white men I was listeing to in January telling me how to live a better life.
Self-improvement guru dudes are all about the gratitude journal.
But I don't hear a lot of men hashtagging their posts, hashtag gratitude or talking about gratitude. It's a very feminized thing. And I feel like it's almost a cousin of privilege. It's used to basically make you stop wanting more or stop speaking out. So, for example, there'll always be someone less privileged than you. So you will always have privilege in any conversation. By the same token, there will always be someone who doesn't have something that you have, whether it's the coffee you got that day, whether it's your physical abilities, whether it's having a job, whether it's living in a country where there's clean drinking water. There will always be things to be grateful for. I just don't know whether knowing that there are people that are worse off changes because it makes you then feel guilty as well. I don't know.
It doesn't. I just think that it stops you from being so much of an entitled dickhead a lot of the time. Like when I'm finding myself getting massively frustrated about things that are relatively small, but yes, would it be good to change them? Yes. But it does help me to go, why am I obsessing about that when I know that my friend is going through X, Y, Z? I don't mean to sound Pollyanna and perfect about it, but I understand what you're saying. But I think that if we dismiss gratitude as it's trying to keep us in a box, that just gives us a free pass to be constantly dissatisfied, striving, expecting a lot from everyone around us, which sometimes might be the right thing, but not constantly. You don't want to live in a constant state of unsatisfied bitterness.
No. Of course not. But her point is that just like one biscuit can be delicious, but a whole packet of biscuits probably isn't that good for you and is not as delicious as just one, some gratitude is crucial and part of a balanced mental diet. But when it tips over, it's about recognizing when it does become toxic. And she said, how do you know if you're experiencing toxic gratitude? She said the word should appears. You should be grateful. And often it'll be either your internal monologue telling you that you should be grateful or someone else telling you. And she says gratitude can stop us dreaming and scheming the life we want. Dream big, go after what you want, and don't believe you should be satisfied with things that don't fill you up.
But dream big and go after the life you want is the premise of our whole society.
All the other messaging.
Every other message we get all the time. You should have those shoes. You should have that bag. You should have that car. You should want a bigger job, more money, bigger house. That is the constant messaging in our life. Gratitude is subversive because it's saying maybe it's sometimes okay to go, you know what?
I have enough.
I have enough, or I should be grateful for what I have. I mean, I agree with you that ultimately it should be about balance and striving. Another word we hate, balance. But I don't think there could be a credible argument that we don't live in a society that pushes us to want improvement.
Enoughness.
And not be grateful. That's true.
I think enoughness is incredibly countercultural. And the thing that gratitude does as well is it makes you sit there and go, okay, what do I truly feel grateful for? And then when you look at it, you're like, that's weird because they're not the things I'm striving for. So, for example, you strive for the handbag, the fancy handbag or whatever, and then you sit down and you go, I don't even feel grateful for that handbag I bought yesterday, actually.
That's interesting.
And then
so
you
realize
realise
it can be clarifying.
It can be very clarifying because the mirage that we chase isn't actually what we sit down and
it's also
value.
kind of, and I agree with you, it's a cousin to privilege because it's really asking you to acknowledge that we're not on a level playing field. It's asking you to acknowledge being grateful for things that you didn't do. Like, you know, your childhood that you were given, the place you were born, all those things you said.
The roof over your head.
Yeah, it's not because you're some kind of chosen one or you worked really hard for it, although in some circumstances it might be. It's kind of acknowledging there's a baseline here that's different for everybody. And I don't know, for me, I think it's helpful. However, I will never use the hashtag grateful.
Outlouders, we are putting in after the episodes, by popular request, a thread. What we do is an episode thread now where we say what was in the episode and we want you guys to jump in and comment and you can all chat about it in one place rather than having like dozens of disparate conversations. So I'll post it in the Outlouders. It is pinned to the top. If you go to the Mamamia
Same with
Outlouders.
Instagram if that's your preferred social medium of choice.
If you go to the Outlouders group, it'll be pinned to the top and then you can go and find it. We would love to hear what you think about gratitude, whether it is something you do every day or if you find it's a bit gaslighty. Quick recommendation before we go. I want to recommend a movie to see at the movies. Poor Things with Emma Stone.
Oh, she's an experiment.
Good evening.
Her brain and her body are not quite synchronized. But she's progressing at an accelerated pace.
Tell me, where did she come from?
I shall. For it is a happy tale.
I am Bella Baxter, and there is a world to enjoy, circumnavigate. It is the goal of all to progress, grow.
A woman plotting her course to freedom. How delightful.
So this is Oscar nominated, and at this time of year, I always think I should go and see all the Oscar nominated movies. And when I was young, I actually used to do that. But now it's times hard. So you're telling me this is definitely worth it. Everybody says. What's so good about it?
Really good. Okay, it's quirky and it's weird. But the problem with quirky and weird movies sometimes is that they're a bit boring. Not boring. Not boring. So kept my attention the whole way, which is my standard of good art. It is so wacky. It has lots of crazy sex scenes. Mark Ruffalo is hilarious. He's really, really funny in it. The guy who wrote it is Aussie. He also wrote The Favourite.
Which is directed by the same person too.
Yes, exactly.
Is it like that? Because The Favourite, which did win Oscars and things, was very wild.
It is almost like a
Science
take on
fiction?
the Frankenstein story. So it's someone who has made almost like a doll. I don't want to give anything away, but made this character that's his own monster or creation. And then she begins to evolve.
A bit like a Tradwife on Instagram.
And without giving anything away, it's almost about an allegory for women going from object to subject of their own lives. So she begins as an object and then you watch her
like Barbie
grow up. There's a lot of similarities, like this doll thing about women being dolls seems to have had a moment in 2023. It's so clever. What you're going to want to do is as soon as you finish it, go and read everything on it. I listened to interviews with Tony McNamara, the Aussie who wrote it, and it'll make you think. It's about liberation and the sex positive movement and
it's Emma Stone.
Patriarchy. Yes, and it is Emma Stone.
She's
and
at the top
brilliant.
of her game.
Yeah.
I love Emma Stone.
It's very, very good.
One of my friends told me it's a masterpiece yesterday.
Yes, yeah,
okay, so on the
masterpiece.
list.
Yeah.
It's called Poor Things at the movies now.
If your word of the year is move because you want to do more exercise this year or maybe more breath work, more stretching, more meditation, you can do it at home with the Move app. We've launched it. You've probably heard us talking about it. Jessie and I both used it all through our break. What's lovely about it, the Move by Mamamia exercise app, you don't need any equipment for any of it. You can choose anything from cardio, how long you want to work out, what type of workout you want to do. And there's an instructor for each of them, but then there's also little cameos by me, Jessie, Holly, and some of the other Mamamia teams.
Work out with us.
It's so upsetting.
So we're the the avatar, that where they're like playing along. You can basically, so you can see someone who is as uncoordinated as you are.
Yeah.
I discovered my exercise face when I watched this back.
I discovered your exercise face too because I worked out a lot with you in the background and it made me laugh, your exercise face.
And what my mum has done is cast it to her television and now she does workouts in her lounge. Okay, she got my brother to cast it onto her television and she's bloody loving it. What a lot of Outlouders don't know is that this is included in your subscription. So if you're a Mamamia subscriber, you already pay for Move, it's included. So it's an app, you can get it, or you can get it on your laptop, or you can get it on your TV and you can cast it. And
so not only do you get us in your ears 5 days a week, but you also get
an
a whole
exercise app
in your pocket. We will put a link to Move in our show notes.
Thank you for listening to Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman. And we've had audio production from Leah Porges. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye. Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do it. There's a link in the episode description.